Following the end of the Seven-Year War in 1763, which was a global conflict between the British and the French over British colonists' desires to expand beyond the original 13 colonies, the British were victorious and in extreme debt from the war. So in 1765, the British decided to make the American colonies pay a large share of this debt through the creation of the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax imposed on the 13 colonies by the British Parliament and essentially required all American colonists to pay a tax on every piece of printed paper. This included legal documents, licenses, newspapers, playing cards, etc. The Stamp Act was imposed by the British Parliament as the British believed that it was the 13 colonies' responsibility to aid in the war debt that provided the colonies more land, and therefore more money. The Stamp Act along with the Sugar Act, which was an act that forced American colonies to import sugar exclusively from the British, resulted in frustrations among the American colonies as the colonies felt as though they had no direct representation in the British Parliament that had created the tax. At this time the American colonies were also upset at the fact that British troops remained in colonist land far after the Seven-Year War had concluded. The British eventually repealed both the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act after expressed outcry from American colonists. However, the British simply replaced each tax with more taxes on the American colonists. This led to organized protests and boycotts from the American colonists which would quickly escalate to chaos between protesters and British troops in the form of events such as the Boston Tea Party of 1773. This event saw American protesters dress up as Native Americans and dump about $1 million worth of tea into the Boston Harbor in protest of the British government taxing tea. As a result of events such as the Boston Tea Party and the growing independence of the American colonies, the British government decided to punish the colonies by imposing a group of incredibly harsh laws known as the Intolerable Acts. These acts infuriated the colonies and further united the American colonies through a shared sense of patriotism and nationalism developed by a hatred for the British government. In 1774, representatives of each of the American colonies met in the form of a Continental Congress in order to ask King George III to abolish the Intolerable Acts. However, they were met with no response. As a result of this continued disrespect from the British in the form of laws and taxes, as well as the intense patriotism among the American colonies, in 1775 the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in small battles in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. The Revolutionary War had officially begun. After realizing that war was imminent, the Continental Congress met once again and appointed George Washington to be the head commander of the Continental Army. The first major battle of the war was known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. At this time the British attempted to take control of Boston, however thousands of colonist troops withstood 2 assaults by the British Army until eventually running out of ammunition and falling to the British Army. Despite being a British victory, this battle benefited the colonists in a major way as the British Army had fallen victim to far more casualties than that of the colonists and were ultimately weakened. Following this, the Continental Congress once again sent another letter to King George III in an attempt to end the war by demanding the British government recognize the rights of American colonists. King George III said no and got even angrier. Following this exchange, the American colonists announced that they were an independent country and free of British rule. On July 4 of 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. In the months that followed the signing, the war had taken its toll on the American colonies as the British had won several significant victories and had murdered and captured thousands of American troops. The American colonies had begun to lose all faith in the war and hope of victory had almost completely diminished. However, in an attempt to regain control of the war, George Washington sailed his men across the incredibly dangerous and icy Delaware River and into New Jersey in a sneak attack against British forces. This resulted in the capture of thousands of British soldiers and was known as the Battle of Trenton. This victory inspired American troops to once again fight and had restored the colonists' faith in the war. Following this, the American forces were successful in major battles such as the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. However, the American forces would once again meet hardship as during the winter of 1777-1778 the American troops led by George Washington had decided to camp out in Valley Forge. Here they would suffer from extreme starvation and sustain major levels of cold air. These conditions once again damaged the morale of the American troops with many wanting to end the war, however, they persevered and survived the winter. The final battle of the war took place in 1781 and was known as the Battle of Yorktown. The British troops under the command of General Charles Cornwallis had been awaiting British ships to deliver supplies and reinforcements. However, to the surprise of the British, the French, who had been aligned with the American colonies, attacked the ships and prevented the ships from making it through. The colonists' troops under the rule of George Washington surrounded the city, preventing British troops from retreating. The Americans continued to bombard the city with attacks for an 11-day period, and after the British had realized that reinforcements were not coming, the British surrendered. Over the next year, the weakened British forces would continue to withdraw from the war, and in 1783 the Treaty of Paris was signed. This treaty officially ended the war and recognized the United States of America as a new and independent nation. The American Revolution and the nationalist ideals in which the revolution was founded on had major global impacts and has had a profound effect on modern society. The American Revolution demonstrated that nationalist values developed by what was known as the Enlightenment era were not simply thoughts and ideas, but rather a tool for social, political, and economic change. This impact is exemplified by the French Revolution, as the nature of the American Revolution was a direct inspiration for the French and French nationalists to revolt against their oppressive monarchy like the Americans. Furthermore, the ideals in which the American Revolution were based upon, such as liberty, governmental change, and patriotism, have a prevalent impact on modern society. For example, the American Revolution helped popularize democratic, conservative ideals and nationalism, as these ideas had never grown to true prominence before the American Revolution. Furthermore, the American Revolution helped shift the world from a monarch-based system into the current democratic system in which most individuals live in today. The American Revolution also provided individuals civil rights and liberties which are still in effect on modern society. For example, the revolutionary idea of equality demonstrated through the American Declaration. The Declaration provided ideas of equality, regulations, and systems which are still incredibly relevant in modern societies. Finally, the American Revolution also popularized the value of nationalism. The idea of nationalism is still felt within modern political systems as a prominent idea, as evident by the creation of elected officials based on a political ideology which was an indirect result of the democratic system popularized by the American Revolution. So, in conclusion, the American Revolution has played a major role in both modern and global societies, as the values the American Revolution were founded upon and also created upon are still evident in modern society.